It's been first and seconded. Would you like to speak to your motion?
No.
Very good. Let's vote. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Motion carries 7-0. Thank you very much. And thank you, David.
Thank you, Council. I'll see you in a little bit.
It's like a bag penny. You just show up, don't you?
Stop being a troublemaker. All right, good evening. I'm going to call this October 2nd Sammamish Planning Commission meeting to order. Let's start with roll call. John Bachman. Here. Syed Sfabian.
Here.
Hisham Elkawad.
Here.
Jay Chakrapani.
Here.
I am Mark Boffman, and I'm here. Vice Chair Mike Bresco has an excused absence, and we have not heard from Commissioner Suda Sankara, so we'll see if she arrives. Next is approval of the agenda. On this evening's agenda is a presentation discussion on some code issues with SMC Title 21, and that's our only new business topic for this evening. Any comments on the agenda? Okay, we'll call the agenda approved. Next is approval of the meeting minutes from the September 18th Planning Commission meeting. Anybody have any corrections from the September 18th meeting? Okay, nobody has any corrections. We'll call the September 18th meeting minutes approved. Next, we'll do public comment. Who would like to make public comment this evening? Or what order would you like to go in? Okay, go ahead, Richard.
Richard Johnson, I live in Sammamish. Thank you for the opportunity. I'd have to say I'm a little disappointed. I had hoped to hear an interesting conversation about traffic tonight. At least at one time that was on the schedule. But I understand now we're going to have to wait another 2 months. Seems kind of long since the questions started being raised in June. Anyhow, I did submit some written public comment on the issue of the year 2023 because that question's been raised, whether it's problematic. And my conclusion, as they say on the medical shows, is that another test is needed. Can use the existing data. I go into it a little bit in details. It's not obviously a problem, but there is a potential problem with that data. Okay, since we're not doing traffic, moving on. I know you folks have a jam-packed agenda coming up, but I also have some suggestions for things that you might want to put on your agenda for the next couple months. As a random citizen, I think that these are questions that would be good for you to address. It is a little bit unfortunate. It is going to take more staff time. Sorry about that. I know it's busy, but I think these are questions that are timely and would be good for all of us residents in the city to have some answers in the near future. Thank you.
Thanks, Richard. Who's next? Go ahead.
I'm Lorene Leo, and I've lived here for 29 years. And like Richard, I came here tonight to talk about traffic, particularly the 2022 or 2023 data, whichever it is that we're using, and also the connector roads that are described as mitigating factors in our final SEIS. But since you're not going to discuss traffic tonight, I will just send you an email about that. And I'll instead address something that's a bit of a bee in my bonnet, all right? Is there any data or evidence that our beautiful town square out here needs to be replaced? Because the town square that we're talking about will be moved to what is now the Notch property, more than likely, the parcel next to the Notch. And that area will be bordered by the brownstones, some apartment buildings, and it will open up onto Southeast 6th Street. I watched the Redmond downtown park. It's 2 acres being built, and that cost $41.2 million a few years ago. Now, we're going to get impact fees, and of course, we're going to, we would also take money from the fund, just as Redmond did, but we're never going to get enough to pay for a new town square. And maybe the residents of Sammamish would like to use those millions of dollars from the general fund and the park impact fees to build out Beaton Hill, the Parker Plat, the rest of Big Rock Park, or maybe even buy land for parks in the future. So I'd just like you to think about that, and thank you.
Thank you. In the packet, if you look at the schedule, November 20th is the currently date for traffic discussion. Could change, but that's what's targeted right now. Now's your chance.
Because of the room, which was good. So here's a copy of it. Good evening, Planning Commissioners. Paul Stickney, Sammamish. I'm handing out a comment I handed out before, but I didn't say at the last meeting because I went on an extemporaneous run last time. So here's what I brought at the last meeting. 2 key statements for our city. Instead of saying no to town center, instead of saying no to 4K in town center, we need to say yes to CHI before TC. And second, it's not about our community against development interests. It's really about we against ourselves. There are many different factions that want different things. That's the true issue. As a community, we must really fully understand CHI, which is citywide housing imbalance, needs for economic and demographic and workforce housing over life and for sustainable generations. We have to compare consequences of beginning to meet CHI internal needs or not, and weigh informed options from residents and opinions on authentic housing needs and disparate consequences. The 2007 EIS, the 2008 Town Center Plan, the 2015 comp plan, all of the 2025 town center EIS plan and code have not been sufficiently informed by quantified CHI housing need factors or any legislatively set housing target numbers for what I call A, B, and C housing. A, I've said several times, is affordable from 175 to 500,000, which is a 30 to 80% AMI. B and C is mostly 500 to $1.4 million with a few high-end condos, and D are larger single-family homes over 1.5. Our city has serious shortages of A, B, and C housing and oversupplies of D relative to local housing needs over time. There's awesome power starting to alleviate CHI housing shortages, allowing residents to stay and enabling holistic added civic benefits. Instead of judging housing supplies in town center yet, don't we need to take a look at a citywide view first? And she says, turn fear into fear. There's many different opinions, some accurate, some not authentic, but we need to change whatever false expectations there are, whether they're intentional or not, from those appearing real, which is fear, into face everything and rejoice. Time to add market rate housing needs that we need to our affordable housing target and plan for all over the next 20 years. It's long overdue. Appreciate the chance to speak. Thank you.
Thanks, Paul. Anybody else? Go ahead. Yep. Just a reminder, make sure you state your name and kind of where you live for the record.
Heather Murphy Rains. I live in Trossix and have lived here for 20 years. I didn't have anything prepared. I just wanted to say thank you guys, because last planning commission meeting was the first one I've had where I've had eye contact. I was so caught off guard last week that I actually lost my train of thought, because I'm used to a council that looks down or scowls at me. So I just wanted to say thank you. That's all I had. I was like, thank you. I actually have eye contact and you guys are listening. So thank you. That's it.
Maybe we don't know any better. Anybody else? Okay, anybody online? I think we have one person we're going to try it. We've had a few technical difficulties if someone's watching this, so we'll see how it goes.
Yes, we have one person online waiting to be able to speak. Peter, I am going to promote you to panelists right now. Let's see if it works.
How's that? Can you hear me?
We can hear you.
Great. Well, good evening, commissioners. My name is Peter Brennan, and I am the Vice President of Land Development at Innovation Realty Partners. Thank you for the opportunity to speak tonight. I would like to touch on 3 points tonight. First, I would like to refresh everyone's memory that our current town center projects passed concurrency back in 2019, before COVID and before hybrid work reshaped commuting patterns. That test evaluated hundreds of intersections and was among the most rigorous in Washington state. Second, this project is also about protecting the natural character of Sammamish. Through King County's Transfer of Development Rights program, we've preserved roughly 53,000 trees and shifted growth away from the forests and into the town center. This preservation contributes to the Emerald Necklace, a ring of connected open spaces, trails, and natural lands. We are proud to be a part of this program, which allows density to support new housing, shops, and gathering spaces. We all know that building a town center means some trees will be removed, and we share the community's concerns as well. That's why we worked early to use TDRs to protect thousands of trees in advance. Plus, we are planning carefully to put the right trees in the right places to support the city's climate action plan for a healthy tree canopy. Third, town center has been delayed far too long. To give just one example, our Brownstones West application was filed in 2019. Nearly 6 years later, 38 townhomes are just now starting to be built. To put this in perspective, it means a middle schooler at the time of our submission would now be in college before seeing those homes become a reality. We have a real opportunity to collectively address the housing crisis, and together we can make real positive change by adding low-rise, mid-rise, and mixed-use housing choices. Despite the costs and delays, we've continued to invest millions because we believe in the town center vision and the city's efforts to update its town center plan. We want to work with you to balance competing interests, address housing needs, and bring much-needed commercial and transit services to create a vibrant Sammamish for both today's residents and future generations. Thank you.
Thanks, Peter. Anybody else? All right, thanks everybody for your comments. Let's move on to our main discussion topic this evening, which is a new business item to talk about some code cleanup related to SMC Title 21. So, Avril, are you starting or is David going to introduce? Go ahead, David.
Thank you, Chair. Give me just a minute while I share my screen. Just a sec. Make sure I find the right thing to share. And I'll go ahead here. All right, so good evening, David Pyle, Department of Community Development. And before we begin with the scheduled item for this evening, I wanted to just provide a brief schedule update on the Town Center Sub-Area Plan and Code Amendment Project. Following the meeting, the last Planning Commission meeting, staff have been working to bring a presentation to the commission that addresses traffic themes from questions received. This is planned for November 20th. The November 20th Planning Commission meeting will be primarily dedicated to hearing from the city's traffic engineer, our traffic planners, our traffic consultants, and technical experts who will be here to deliver a presentation addressing many of the themes that we have picked up through public comment as part of the EIS work, and also public comment following the EIS, and also questions and comments received from the Planning Commission. So we're really hopeful that we can work through a lot of the material and things that we've heard, and we can hear from those that are actually experts in traffic and transportation planning, as that is not myself. I'm not in any way an expert in traffic or transportation planning. So I do rely on that group to help support this effort. In responding to the request from the commission at the last meeting that we develop a Project North Star approach, we also are working on that, and we will be bringing forward a draft concept with the with the agenda packet for that evening. And we're hopeful that we can work with the commission in a workshop setting that evening and come to somewhat of at least a final draft of that in order to wrap that up and help guide us on our work to come on the town center plan and code. Finally, you'll receive an introduction on the initial revised draft plan. We are in the process of continuing to work through the previous initial draft that was released and refine it. And we hope to bring that to you, outline the changes that have been made to it, and identify a process to work through that document going forward, and what tools we have to help assist in that. That will then enable us to continue with work on that into the winter and into the new year. I do agree with many of the topics that were brought up in Mr. Johnson's communication that he provided by email and also mentioned in his verbal testimony. Those are all items that would fit very well with the review of the plan. So do recall that we are going to be working through the plan, the policy component of it first, and that will be followed on later in the year, late spring and summer with the code. So that is the sequential order. Is first we want to make sure we have the policy direction right. Once we feel comfortable with the policy direction, we'll send that off to the council for their review, and we'll begin work on the code itself. Many of the things we hear about are directly code related. They're people wanting to discuss or learn about how something specifically is going to be handled on the ground. So there will be times when we say, this is a great comment, let's hold that. That's something we'll discuss with code. However, as much as we can, we'd like to get to directive or operational policy language, remember that a sub-area plan is a geographic specific implementation plan of how the comprehensive plan will be implemented in a specific geographic area. We're not writing a new comprehensive plan. Instead, we're really trying to identify how the policies, goals, and strategies in the comprehensive plan, in the Parks and Recreation Open Space Plan, the Transit Plan, the Climate Action Plan, the Housing Plan, the Transportation Master Plan, how all of those directions that we already have established as a city will be implemented in a specific geographic area. And so what we're going to be looking for when we go through the plan is what is unique about this statement that applies to this geographic area. We don't need to restate those things that we already say in our comprehensive plan and in all those other planning documents that I listed. Rather, we should be refining those and making those directive in how that is to be achieved or accomplished. That will then enable us to write development regulations to achieve that outcome. So there'll be more on this to come, and in the weeks leading up to this meeting, we will be reaching out to you all again, and we're really hopeful that we can address a lot of what we've heard about transportation. It is a big undertaking to get all of those experts in the room at one time and have them pull together a presentation that's cohesive and understandable to a wide range of audience. It does take a little bit of time, and I apologize for any delay in getting there. I know everyone is eager to talk about traffic, but we want to make sure that we're prepared for it and that we have everyone in the room who's needed in order to have that conversation. With that, we'll move on to the actual scheduled item for this evening. And with me, I have Avril Beatty, who you've met before. She is our current Planning and Permit Center Manager. She has the task of implementing our development regulations that we put in place. She has a team of planners and permit technicians that operate the city's development review process. And she has a lot of experience in working with implementing our codes. Those codes that we develop to implement policy language are usually pretty good shape. However, she does and her team does often identify things about those regulations that are barriers or that don't make sense and that sometimes need to be fixed. So if you recall, we did pass upon the passage of the implementation of the development regulations in December of 2024. With the comprehensive plan, we did also pass a docket item that identified that we think there might be some things we're going to need to change, some minor nits, adjustments. We did go through a first batch that was adopted under Ordinance 2025-583. If you recall, we did that earlier this year. We're now back with a second batch, and it's far more limited than what you saw previously. This is, I'd say, is a smaller batch of cleanups, pretty simple actually. And remember that these are intended to improve usability of the code, fix unintended gaps, and that they're generally non-substantive, meaning that it doesn't really change the outcome. It might change the process to get there a little bit, but it doesn't really change the outcome, and in times offers some flexibility that we're seeing is real challenging for some property owners who are really just trying to use and enjoy their property. With that, I'll turn it over to Avril and work through the slides.
Hello, Avril Beatty, current Planning and Permit Center Manager. I haven't seen you all since last year, so I'm just going to quickly throw in that you all worked very hard to help us with the critical area ordinance update. I know this isn't on the slide, but I just want to let you know it's been in place and it's working really well, and it's really helping with the environmental protections within Sammamish. So good job. Gold stars all around. So as David mentioned, we've had these various rounds of code updates. However, our code as originally adopted in 1999 from King County, there's still like remnants of old things. And so as we review applications and provide public information and do our jobs day to day, we find things that don't make sense, such as there's this code section in regard to what has to be submitted for plats. And as I was trying to make sure our SOPs were up to date, I came across this section and it referenced an RCW. I had no idea what it was. I look it up, it's repealed. So we have a section of code that references a repealed RCW. So since we're doing this cleanup, we just want to take it out. We double checked with the city attorney's office. They highly supported us removing this thing that doesn't actually apply anymore. So low hanging fruit. So next we have cottage housing. So with our middle housing regulations, it was a big lift to get those regulations adopted. And as we go through working with residents who want to do something with their properties, we're trying to figure out how these regulations work. And here's where we find some gaps. We've had questions about cottage housing, and we recognize that there was no square footage for cottage housing in the overlays for the middle housing overlay 1, 2, and 3. And so we've done a director's interpretation where we stated cottage housing could be up to 1,500 square feet. And this aligned with the affordable housing in lieu fee triggers. So we felt like this was a reasonable amount. We also looked at several other cities. The range for cottage housing went from about 1,250 square feet up to 1,700 square feet. So this was well within that range for the region. So we just want to we just want to codify that amount. And so we feel like 1,500 square feet is reasonable. We're hoping you agree. And we just wanted to throw in here, there's another section of code that's referenced under the proposed solution, this SMC 21.04.030 Z8. This section is for when you have an R1 property where you can do a bonus density of cottage homes, but they have to be smaller. They have to be, depending on what you're doing, it's either 900 square feet or 1,200 square feet. So this 1,500 square feet would only be for regular cottage homes. It wouldn't be for the ones that are allowed under that bonus in the R1 zoning district. Yes?
Yeah, one of the challenges we've been having is we have had a few builders that have wanted to build cottage housing that was, say, 2,200, 2,500 square feet, and we don't think that's cottage housing. So we just need to put a cap on it. We think 1,500 square feet is a reasonable size for cottage housing. It's actually fits, according to some of the builders, you can still fit a 3-bedroom house, 3-bedroom, 2-bathroom house into a 1,500 square foot unit. So we think it's a reasonable size. It could still accommodate a family. It brings the price point down by simple square footage. And it also is allowed as a middle housing type. You could build 3 cottages on one property as detached units. So it does still fit within the intent of the middle housing rules. The thing that Avril's talking about, absolutely true. We do have a bonus allowance under the MHO1, under R1, that intends to allow for additional cottages if they're smaller. The goal there is to get much smaller units, and it's trying to incentivize builders to build, units that are in 800, 900 square feet that are good starter homes for people in a cottage type cluster with amenities. So,
can I ask you a question? How about the minimum?
We don't have a minimum size. There are building code regulations for like minimum bedroom sizes and things to that effect, but we don't have a minimum size. Generally, minimum size of a unit is something that occurs in cities where they have micro unit regulations, but that's a different animal.
What Seattle has?
Sorry, say that again?
What Seattle has?
I have no idea. I don't know.
Macro. What's the macro size?
I know some cities it can be down to like 200 square feet, but I don't know. I don't know what Seattle has. I'm thinking anecdotally back to my experience from California. So I don't know what local places.
So you're not
here.
going to set the minimum. That's what I'm hearing.
No, and
let's cap it at 1,500.
Right. I would be mildly surprised if someone tried to request a micro unit in Sammamish.
Thank you.
A quick question. So the 1,500 is total livable space?
Yes, so that would not include garage?
Yeah, and well, the reason I'm asking is in the updated comprehensive plan, we limited single-family to 3,000 square feet as the base, not the.
As the footprint.
Not the total,
Yeah.
as the footprint. So just, so there's no confusion.
Right.
Absolutely, yeah. So we do limit the building footprint to 3,000 square feet, which could allow for up to a 9,000 square foot volume of home. We've had some challenges, and we'll get to one later here, you'll see in a bit. We've had some challenges with property owners where they think the 3,000 square foot limit is overly restrictive. I understand, that some people are wanting to build a much bigger rambler. We've had some that wanted to build 5,000-6,000 square foot single floor homes. And that is something our code does not currently allow. However, you could build a 9,000 square foot home that's 3 stories tall. We're just, it just is the way the code is set up today. If you recall, the reason why there's a 3,000 square foot footprint limit is because HB 1110 says that development regulations that apply to middle housing cannot be more restrictive than what applies to single family. So you have to allow the same envelope and same density and dimensional standards that apply to single family to apply to middle housing. You can't be more restrictive on middle housing than what you allow for single family. So that's why we added that 3,000 square foot limit, because we had some concern that you could start to see a 4-pack, a 5-pack, a 6-pack pop up on a property, and you might end up with a building volume of 10, 12, 15,000 square feet in a single family district, and we thought that was unacceptable, so we capped it at 3,000, which we found was still allowing a 9,000 square foot volume, but we do have single family homes that push that limit sometimes anyway. We have some pretty big homes built here in the city.
So first, a disclaimer. I've not been here for the last couple of meetings, so if I ask a question which you already discussed, you can whack me in the back of my head. The question that I had is that why are we saying, okay, we will allow for smaller units, 900, 1,200 square feet, and still saying you can create a maximum of 1,500 square feet? Why don't we go down to 1,200 or 900 itself? Because 1,500 is like a large condominium.
So anecdotally, I live in a 1,500 square foot townhouse. I've raised 3 kids in a 3-bedroom, 1,500 square foot residence. So for me, it seems a little odd that my home would fall under the definition of a cottage house, because it just feels like a regular house to me. If you so recommend a smaller square footage, we will take whatever recommendation you have. We are open to whatever suggestions you have.
Okay. So this is not based on like years of study or something like that?
No, we were just looking, when we did this director's interpretation, we were just looking at what's generally allowed in this region. We were looking at a 1,500 square foot cottage home would be exempt from the affordable housing in lieu fee or from the affordable housing calculations. So that felt within the realm of reasonable for that interpretation. So now just to codify something, if you would like to recommend a smaller square footage, we are all ears.
The only reason I thought of that, and I'll stop after this, is that goes back to Commissioner John's question, right? 1,500 square foot of built-up area that's there, and if that cottage owner says, hey, I'd like to have an impervious addition to it, just a little bit of a lawn space that I'm using for doing this thing, now you're suddenly talking of a bigger area than what we had. And that does not fit into a cottage home strict definition. So why are we even pushing to that limit is my question. That's all.
Can you just refresh our memory or my memory? What is the difference between cottage home and a townhomes?
So a cottage home is a standalone little building versus townhomes are generally attached to other, within like a row.
How about number of floors?
there wouldn't be a limit to the number of floors. In theory, you could still do the 3 stories for a cottage.
Unlikely, but possible.
Yeah.
One other defining factor about cottages is they're typically built in clusters. So you'd see them, they usually have shared amenities, so you'd see like a shared carport, shared garages. Cottages generally don't have garages. Most builders do that because it's an efficient use of hardscape or impervious surface. When you're, there's multiple, as we've said before, there's multiple dials or levers. I think of a, land use planning like a giant Etch-a-Sketch with lots of dials on it, and every time you turn one of the dials, it changes the outcome of what's happening. Right. So what we're looking at here is it's a whole toolkit too. It's not just one tool that really drives the outcome. What we're looking at is trying to ensure that we're not going to get 2,500 square foot buildings being built that are basically single family homes using the cottage housing allowance because it's a loophole, which basically it is right now, a loophole. And we want to close that loophole. We think 1,500 square feet is a reasonable size for the reasons Avril explained. If you wanted to go smaller or bigger, that's why we're talking about it. We'll write the code amendment in the red line, and we'll come back on the 16th. And if you want to turn it one way or another and you make a motion and you agree, hey, I think we should set this higher or lower, knowing that, it's not the end of it. We could always adjust it down the line again if we're having a lack of productivity of cottages and we set the size to 1,250 or something, we could come back and raise it to 1,500. That is one of the ways I like to design codes, and I think it's really helpful to think of it this way, is that we want to have the tool in place and we want to calibrate the tool to get the outcome we want, so that we don't have to revisit adding or changing the tool itself. It's really about where is the setting in the tool. So then all we need to do is, turn the dial a little bit to get to 1,500, so to speak. So, it's not that big of a deal. We just want to put some form of a cap on it because we don't currently have one.
So the square footage difference that we were talking about between, I guess, under 1,500, would that be applicable to the townhomes?
So the definition of middle housing includes townhomes, includes cottage homes. They are different things within the umbrella of middle housing. So
this definition would apply to the townhomes too?
No, it wouldn't.
No, that's my question.
Okay, so it would not apply. There are other development standards regarding floor ratio and density and whatnot, and also the footprint and hardscape.
I'm only talking about the square footage. That's
Okay,
all.
so for square footage, it would be separate.
Would be separate?
Yeah.
Different guidelines?
Yes.
Thank you.
So Commissioner Ajay mentioned maybe smaller. I want to go back to Paul's notion of retirement housing. I also live in a house that's just about 1,500 square feet. And that, for us, is going to be very comfortable. We're retired. So as a retired person, I don't think I'd want to go less than that. New family, that's probably fairly comfortable. So I kind of like the 1,500 where you get the 3 bedrooms, 2 bedrooms and an office, plus a garage. That's my personal opinion, just based on my personal experience.
I would just add for thought is that I think it's easy to say, well, if we made it smaller, they'd be more affordable. I'm not really convinced that you would sell something to somebody for that much different of a price, whether it was 1,500 or 1,250. I mean, in theory, it should, but I'm not really sure the amenities are going to be kind of the same, and you're just going to have a smaller couple of rooms. I'm not sure how much that would contribute to the affordability. It seems like it would, but I'm not really sure that it would in Sammamish. So we can think about it for when the code gets presented.
So in 2 weeks, we'll be back with drafted red lines. And so one thing to noodle on in the next 2 weeks is sort of like you said, like the economics of it. If we have it at 1,200 square feet versus 1,500, that 300 square feet could be, another bedroom and bathroom, or, a larger living room or whatever. And so will homeowners or, and developers, any of them If they see 1,200, will they just decide not to? And then we lose that opportunity? I don't know. So I don't have a crystal ball, but just something to think about. Will it be more enticing if they can build 1,500? I wish I knew the answer to that, but just something for you guys to provide some feedback on.
I'm sorry.
Would it be possible to kind of give us some examples of what the other cities, let's say cities on the east side, when you come back and kind of show how Redmond is dealing with it, or Kirkland?
We can. I can absolutely put together a table of what at least their square footages are. Absolutely.
The 1,500 and you also live in a 1,500 house. How wide are the hallways, the bathrooms? Because if I'm thinking retirees, you need wider hallways, you need bigger bathrooms, and those will require the 1,500 more than the 1,200.
Right. So the idea with the cottage homes, as David had mentioned, is that it's a little clustering of smaller buildings, and so the image is of 1- and 2-story homes. My residence is a 3-story townhouse style home. So there's not a lot of room for hallways. So, I've got my stack of stairs, so there really aren't any because there isn't space for them. I don't know if that actually answers your question, though.
So I can't speak from experience since my house is over 100 years old. It has all sorts of challenges, but I would imagine a modern cottage house would be designed for easy entry and that sort of thing.
Most modern construction is people love open concept. They like the open spaces. The old days of like long hallways with bedrooms off of this long hallway, we don't see those. And so in all of the building permit applications that my group reviews, we don't see those sort of linear spaces. Everything's much more sort of cohesive and centralized.
One other ask I would have when we revisit this, since there's some interest, I realize who I'm talking to here, so I feel stupid saying this, but I swear I recall that we had some other limitations on cottage housing, that you wouldn't end up with like a 3-story, 500 square foot footprint. I swear we talked about that, and I thought we did something with it.
So under the additional density allowances for cottage homes, there's a lot of code text and illustrations and tables to result in those 900 and 1,200 square foot ones. So you probably are thinking of those.
You could, by definition, add a restriction that says that it is no more than, maybe make it a single story. You could make it, but then you'd miss out on maybe a dormer or something in there, right? But you could also say with detached clustered garages and or carports and parking, that makes sure then that the garage isn't attached to the building. So you get that sort of, design that you're looking for with cottages, not just like traditional single family homes. So we could look at, by definition, a cottage is no bigger than 1,500 square feet, no taller than 24 feet, and does not, and where garages and carports, and garages are detached and centrally located.
Yeah, I guess as a first step, I'd just like to, and maybe I'll just do this, try to revisit what we did end up implementing to help us picture in our minds what 1,500 means versus 1,200 might mean. Because 1,500 starts to get in that realm of you could end up with these, stacks, which I think is kind of not what people are envisioning should be cottage housing. It should be more.
The 2-story and height limitation would absolutely prevent tall stacks.
So we do have a host of rules that relate to cottages, but they only apply in the MH01 to the bonus cottages. That's currently how the code is structured. And the realization that we came to is, and that was a lot of code work that we did, was that you could still build cottages in the MH02 and MH03, and even in the MH01 that aren't using the bonus, that are unrestricted. So what we're trying to do here is we're trying to find a way to still move forward. They're a middle housing type, and we can't be more restrictive to those than we are to other single family. The reason why we could in the other category was because of the bonus. And when there's a bonus, it's actually more generous, if you will, than single family. So that's how we were able to get there. What we're trying to do here is, simply say that we're trying to define the middle housing type instead of adding a dimensional standard restriction. So if by defining it, we add those restrictions, I think we could get there and legally do that.
Okay, thank you.
Does the floor area ratio applies to the cottage house?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Is that the same ratio as we have single family homes?
Starts at 0.5, goes to 0.65 for 2 units, single unit 0.5, 2 units 0.65, 3 units 0.8, up 0.15 up.
Would the floor area ratio would be applicable or kind of applies to what we were discussing as far as building heights and the number of floors?
Well, it all works as a whole toolkit. So it's not any one of the zoning controls that basically results in the outcome. If you have to look at basically a grid of tool, we've been plotting these in Excel, trying to figure out where the sweet spot is, because we have people who are interested in these now, and we're trying to understand what the different outcomes might be and where there might be a gap or a loophole. So we've been looking at FARs, we've been looking at hardscapes, and generally speaking, there are instances when the FAR is the limiting factor. But in other instances, the 0.4 or there's 0.4, 0.6, and 0.8 hardscape.
The percentage of hardscape that's allowed.
So generally speaking, which one trumps the whole thing? Floor area ratio?
It's what the way I say it is the finest filter catches the grain. So whichever one in that instance, based on that design, is the one that controls, is what controls. And the fascinating thing is they all kind of culminate around a 3,000 square foot unit being the max you can really achieve in middle housing. So it kind of worked. It just depends, and sometimes it's a little higher and a little lower, depending on which tool what the project proposal is, because there's a wide range of, middle housing includes cottages, duplexes, triplexes, 4-packs, stacked flats, courtyard apartments. So it's this wide range of housing typologies that could be built, which makes it really hard to say, oh, this one zoning control is what's going to control it here. It's really a whole toolkit as we think of it.
How about the lot size?
But we don't have a minimum lot size, and we no longer are focused on lot sizes because the legislature basically says that you can have 3 units on a lot, doesn't matter how big the lot is. And we also, as a city, allow middle housing based on density if you're on a bigger lot.
Thank you.
So I like the idea of the height restriction, but think of a garage as, depending on the design of the cottages, I'm assuming there's multiple, they might want centralized parking, or you might want an attached garage that you're using for, like most of us, storage or a workspace, or to keep your car in close, so you don't have to go out in the weather. But so the only restriction I think I would support would be height.
Is there some data on what kind of buyers come for these cottage houses? And the reason I asked that was based on Commissioner Hisham's question. If they need a wider hallway, a wider staircase than a normal one, because sometimes we might need some additions to it to move up and down or something like that. Do we have any information on that based on other cities?
We don't, and in my experience, and Avril could speak to hers in California, but in my experience in other cities I've worked in, it's a wide range of different interests.
So there's
and we can't require wider hallways. We can't require ADA accessibility or ADA showers, or I'm currently shopping for a new home for my parents right now and finding it very challenging to find a home that is properly set up for them to move into. I wish we could require that a certain percentage of units are built to age in place. We just don't have that a lot. We don't have the ability to do that.
So then that is dependent on the builder himself, who may decide what they want to do with it.
Yes.
I mean, if they're looking at marketability, you will have a greater range of potential buyers by having things accessible, by having, the showers that don't have a curb or, wide enough doors or not too many stairs or things like that. But anecdotally, I would say it's everybody, across the socioeconomic spectrum that are looking to have normal size homes, because so many new homes these days are very large and they're very expensive. And so just anecdotally, I know people in their 40s like me, people in their 20s and 30s, my mom's friends in their 60s and 70s. It's everybody is looking for newer homes that are modestly sized.
Got it. So I was thinking if there is a way that we can condense the models for our 16th meeting, but it looks like it's just going to be a wider, one size for everyone kind of a approach that we are looking at. Is that fair?
This is just another, I don't think a cottage home would be one size fits all, but this is one of the many options within the menu of affordable middle housing.
The most popular middle housing type right now is a duplex. That is what we understand from other cities to be the most popular. It's where you can get the most flexibility in laying it out in a lot arrangement. It is where you only are sharing one common wall. Some people don't find it desirable to share a wall. When my sister bought her first townhome, my comment was, you should go into the unit next door, which is also for sale, find a stereo of some kind and turn the volume all the way up and go in the one that you want to buy and see what it sounds like. And she didn't buy it. That was like, yeah, no, I don't, it's noisy. It's a real thing. So duplexes and cottages, you're not sharing as many walls. That's why those tend to be more attractive. The price points seem to come down with triplexes and 4-packs. Unfortunately, the way condominium laws work right now, a real attractive building typology would be a stacked flat, where you could get, say you're building a 2,500 square foot footprint and you build 3 stories and you build an elevator, a shared elevator on the side, and everybody has their own flat. That allows you to, walk around and roll around the flat. It's easier to get around. You can age in place. But the condominium laws in Washington state are such that liability for builders to build vertically is a no-go. So until the legislature makes the next round of corrections to condominiums, we're likely not going to see stacked vertical condominium construction, which could be a real benefit. If it's built right, it could be a real amazing product.
Got it. Thank you.
David, you just said a minute ago something kind of caught my attention. You said that we cannot require ADA compliance. Is that a state law or a federal?
Yeah, we can't require that a home be built to have hallways wide enough for wheelchairs, doorways wide enough for wheelchairs, bathrooms that have.
Says who? Is that a state guideline?
I don't know of any city that requires that, and I don't know that we can add that as a building code requirement. The state building code council sets building codes for publicly accessible spaces. Yes, absolutely. There is ADA requirements that go along with that. However, when you're talking about building a home and internal for a homeowner, I don't know where the authority would come from for us to be able to do that. I would love to see it happen. I don't know.
Except that if you do that, you exacerbate the affordability problem.
Yeah, it's going to increase the cost substantially.
Yeah. So we're ready to move to the next one if you are.
This is another question that came up recently that we did a director's interpretation on. This is just to clarify that an accessory dwelling unit as a unit that is used solely by the residents of that unit will have their own separate external entrance. And without this requirement, there have been proposals for ADUs to be accessed through the primary residence. We have no objections to internal access. You may have internal access between an ADU and a primary residence, but the ADU should have its own separate entrance, you know, in case it's Thanksgiving time and you need your own space away. And yeah. So this is really a cleanup item, and there's most cities in the region within their definition of ADU, they even include that as part of their definition. So we just want to tuck it into ours.
This is the current definition.
Yeah. So we'll just we'll make it a slightly longer sentence with that requirement. I'm not seeing any objections. Okay, great. Another new process that we have are these quasi-judicial rezonings. And so this is to implement the comprehensive plan to allow small upzonings of properties to be matching whatever is an adjacent higher zoned residential zoning district. And so in going through these regulations and coming up with these process and procedures, the question was asked, well, what is an area-wide rezone when we're talking about these? And so if you look up on the screen, this subsection G, this is from Title 21, and this is from our procedural section, referring to what types of rezonings can fall under this process. But there was a sentence that said area-wide rezones are subject to Title 24A, which is the comprehensive plan title. Is that what you would, how do you refer to it?
Yeah, it's
Okay.
the chapter that outlines the process to update the comprehensive plan and development regulations.
Like the administrative component of it. So looking at Title 24A, it also references that area-wide, either future land use maps or area-wide zoning changes can only be considered during a periodic update. Okay, so then the question was, what is an area-wide rezone? We don't have a definition. So we just want to make it really clear when it's applicable to be the quasi-judicial versus when it's an area-wide. So we just we want to come up with definitions of these two so that it's very clear. If you have any feedback on what that language could be, yes, David?
Yeah, I will say that these are distinctively different processes. So an area-wide rezone is the traditional type of rezoning that goes through a legislative process. It's where a city council will work through a change to the comprehensive plan possibly, or if the comprehensive plan doesn't need to be changed, look at taking a large area of parcels and rezoning it in order to achieve a public policy objective, right? That's what an area-wide rezone is. We historically had only had basically the area-wide rezone process as a city. We added to our development regulations and following our comprehensive plan what is known as the quasi-judicial rezone process, which is for typically one parcel at a time, that if there was merit and you met the criteria to rezone your property, because as Avril said, and the way the code lays it out and the way the comp plan lays it out is that, so say you're in the R4 and you're next to R6, and you meet the criteria, there's some criteria around critical areas, water and sewer availability, things like that, that then you can go through what's known as a quasi-judicial rezone process, which is a hearing examiner process, and it allows you to rezone your property. We've had a couple come in. We haven't, just to be sure, we have this rezone process and we haven't seen a flood of applications to rezone. We had one for a while, and then we got a second.
We have two applications under that are currently being processed. We just had two submitted that are in the process of being screened for completeness.
So what's happening here is we're not talking about changing the quasi-judicial rezone process. That is criteria driven. It's up to a hearing examiner to review it for compliance with the criteria. There's a hearing that goes along with that. There's public noticing, all the things, right? That's the quasi-judicial process. And we're not talking about changing the area-wide rezone process, where it's a legislative process and where it's a city council decision, and it's quite a long timeline to get there, and there's all these steps you have to take. Instead, what we're wanting to do is to define them so that somebody understands that when we say area-wide rezone, we mean this. And when we say quasi-judicial rezone, we mean this. Because currently they're not defined in the code, and there is some confusion amongst the applicants, the staff, and the community around what these processes are. We want to just add some clarity in between the two.
Two questions. Question number one, as an example, is Mr. James Easton. Is that area-wide rezoning application?
Yeah, so what that would be is first of all, creation of a neighborhood center. So what he asked for was that, and docketed, and had you all review and the council review, inclusion of the general geographic area of his property as what the comprehensive plan calls a future potential neighborhood center.
So
right?
that is an example that we're going to be seeing.
It's an example, except that that's a two-step process. The first step is we go through the planning process, much like a sub-area plan, and we create a neighborhood center plan that identifies at the policy level, a geographic specific implementation of the comp plan in that area and how we want to see that area build out. Then the second step in the process, just like what we're doing with the town center, would be to set up the zoning. So that's the development regulations, right? You would rezone the property. So that would be a comprehensive plan adoption of a neighborhood center plus an area-wide rezone to implement zoning and development regulations.
And the second question, before the creation of a town center, did the city go through that process because you had to go through the area rezoning?
Absolutely. So the adoption of...
So that's another example.
Yeah, the town center plan, and then the town center zoning and development regulations.
So if somebody asked a question.
Absolutely.
Town center went through rezoning.
Right.
And another one in the future would be Easton's property. These are a good example.
Good examples. Thank you.
So I have a question. Is this necessary? This redefinition, is that necessary?
So
because
this is
we
something...
anyway seem to be talking with particular example of the town center or with Mr. Eastman's property or something like that, and they seem to be pretty few and far between. That are we boxing ourselves in a hole by putting all this language around here? It's very easy for someone to come and then say, okay, this is an area-wide rezone, or no, this is quasi-judicial because we have a hearing examiner.
So
I remember this because you had mentioned, sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off.
No, go ahead.
But I remember this because you talked about a hearing examiner in one of the previous meetings and other things. So usually somebody who knows this process knows this well. Why are we trying to put definitions into this thing right now?
So the area-wide zoning examples and the quasi-judicial rezonings are sort of on the opposite ends of the spectrum of the inquiries and applications that we can get.
Two different processes? One
Yes.
goes through the hearing examiner, the other one doesn't?
Because the area-wide ones are much more process, and there's multiple actions having to be taken by council. So where the gap is homeowners or property owners who might be in the R1 zoning district and they're only surrounded by R1 zonings, but they want to zone to R4. They don't meet the criteria for the quasi-judicial rezoning to be decided by the hearing examiner, but it might only be like one or two properties. So one or two properties isn't quite an area. And so that's where it's not clear, is that an area-wide rezoning? So if you're not qualified as a quasi-judicial rezoning, is anything else an area-wide? So we just want to fill in like the space in between the two ends.
Yeah, totally with you on that. I love that definition that you're saying with this thing, but I somehow feel that there are so few of these things that we try to define it, we're trying to get into trouble, and then we will come back to this to say, well, we'd like to define it something else. When I come in and I'm doing this thing and I'm saying, okay, this is what I want to do, and you tell me, no, this is an area-wide rezone, it has to go to the city council, or this has to go to a hearing examiner, we'll take the process and move forward with it, rather than challenge on the definition. I somehow don't understand the need to define it pre.
Well, so one option that you are absolutely able to recommend is, we don't think you should. We don't think we need a definition, which is an absolutely valid recommendation if you choose to make that. Yes, David?
Yeah, I'll add one thing, and I think it's also for community members and neighbors who are interested parties. And one of the biggest causes for, I want to say, appeals or misunderstanding is the process. And when we have community members that are reading regulations where it's unclear, then there tends to be messaging that goes out to others that, hey, the city's not using the right process. We think that it should be this process, and this should be legislative. It should go to the city council. And it's quite a bit of work for us to unwind that type of messaging out in the community. And we think that we can avoid that altogether by adding this nit to the code so that we point to this, and neighbors who are rightfully concerned, and I'm not trying to take away from that, but that they understand that, yeah, this is the process to do this.
I'm going to ask one more question, and that is that are all these regulations applicable both to residential and non-residential use, commercial? Because in the case of town center, the answer is yes. In the case of
yes, an example is we are going through the process of amending and docketing and amending the Building 120, the Central Washington University process, where the city is interested in rezoning that to a higher zone. And it's not in the town center, right? But it's currently zoned, I want to say R4, the property. So I think we're working to rezone it to community business, which is the highest commercial zone in the city that's not in in the town center or another center, right? So that would be a use of the area-wide rezone process as an example. So it does apply, and you can even go from residential to commercial. Now the quasi-judicial rezoning process, you could argue could apply, except that once you get up into the future land use map commercial designations, there is no range of zoning under those. They are static and identical to the zoning. So for example, you have a future land use map designation of community business, and within that geographic area, the only zone that you have is commercial business. So there is nowhere to rezone under a quasi-judicial rezoning. Now, in theory, if the comprehensive plan had a commercial district, which was a larger area, and then under that commercial future land use map designation, there were 3 or 4 different options for zones: neighborhood business, community business, regional business, and you were in one of the lower zones and you were next to one of the higher zones, then you could use the quasi-judicial rezoning process. So the answer is yes, you could use it, but that's really not a possibility right now, simply because we don't have that option in our commercial districts.
Thank you.
So my comment here is, as a resident, literally the first place you go is to the city's website to look up information. So that in my mind, the tighter you can nail down the quasi-judicial, the better. I mean, the wide area, the docketing process can cover a lot of ground, but the quasi-judicial is probably worth some effort in nailing that down.
Thank you. Yeah.
So this is another definition issue. We have a definition of unit lot. Technically in our code, it's lot, comma, unit. And this definition only allows one dwelling unit on the lot. And so the idea that for middle housing, it doesn't really jive with what we're trying to accomplish with middle housing. So we just want to take that component out, and we hope you have no objections to that.
there's a multitude of arrangements for ownership these days that are different than they used to be. The legislature has really pushed us to allow for quite a few different arrangements for ownership.
Okay, great. So this is a public comment consistency or inconsistency that we found. And so in this section of code, this is our commercial site development permits section, has a 14-day comment period.
15, right?
Well, 15-day comment period, but it ends at 4:30 p.m. This is an old section of code. We have a 21-day comment period. We would like to strike this and have a consistent 21-day period across the board, and we hope you don't object. Great, okay.
So it's just going to change that last.
We would strike it and just reference, we already have within the administrative section that land use applications have that 21-day. So this conflicts with that. If something came in today, we would revert to the 21-day anyways. So we just want to take this part out and use the other one. Yeah, we want to take this out and just use what we already have. Yeah. So this validity of land use approvals, currently, once you have a land use approval, either and this is not subdivision of land. This is for a conditional use for a church or a reasonable use exception for a home built on a property heavily constrained with critical areas. Those sort of situations where they have 2 years to commence construction of the project under our current rules. We would like to change that to a complete building permit submittal to allow a little bit more flexibility in that time frame. And because we've had situations where a church got a land use approval to expand, they got their CUP, and they were struggling to do their fundraising to do the project. And so and we're not going to gain anything. There's no benefit to having that restriction. So we just want to make this a little bit more sort of user-friendly. But this would still result in the same build-out of what was entitled within that either use permit or reasonable use exception or variance or whatever it is.
Yeah, we also note that it's a lot harder these days to find an engineer and architect. It's a different world than it was 10 years ago. And applicants have a bit of a harder time managing the permit package, all the materials that are required they pull together. So they get through reasonable use exception, right? And they have this approval and the clock starts ticking. And then they have currently 2 years to commence construction from the date of that approval, right? And there are no extensions and other things in there. So we've seen projects where somebody's invested a lot of money in a commercial or a conditional use permit or something that has expired. And they have to restart that whole process and go back all the way through that. What we're saying is you just got to have a complete application in the door, deemed complete, and the fees paid for the review of that application within the 2-year period. And then once that happens, then we have codes in place that restrict the duration and life cycle of a building permit, and it would run with the building permit at that point. Now, if you get to that point and your building permit lapses and expires before it gets approved, you're out of luck. I mean, at that point, we're trying to give you every opportunity to be successful, but at some point, if you simply can't pull it off, it just dies on the vine.
And you do have a deadline for concurrency, right?
It then runs with so concurrency, what's interesting is you're not necessarily required to get a concurrency certificate for a conditional use permit or for a reasonable use permit, because you're not applying for a building permit at that point. You can defer concurrency until building permit under reasonable use and under conditional use. However, you do then have to get it at the point of building permit application. So it really depends, because if you did get it before getting a reasonable use, for example, then it would run with the reasonable use, and then it would run with the building permit, and ultimately it would, if the building permit expired, your concurrency certificate would expire. But if you built it, then it would live with the life of the project from there forward.
So this might be too far into the weeds, but is there a need to somehow document any of that? And when I say that, what I mean is somebody gets their reasonable use exception, they drag it out for a while, they finally get their permit submitted, and time goes by and it doesn't get approved and the project dies. Is there some record that says this reasonable use exception no longer applies, so somebody doesn't come along, buy the property and go, well, I see right here there's a reasonable use exception?
So
Is there something that closes the loop?
The approval itself includes the time frame in it, so it helps when people actually read the documents that pertain to their property that they're buying. Doesn't always happen. And then when staff, every time we see a building permit application come in related to something that required entitlement, we are looking up the conditions to make sure everything is still valid. And so if the property owner doesn't catch it, as soon as they come to us, we look it up.
So let me follow Mark's question a little bit differently. So let's say that somebody goes through the process and get the part of the work done, but for some reason the property is sold to somebody else. What happens to some of those approval? Let's say
So it runs with the land. It runs with the land. So if someone gets
so the ownership doesn't play a role as far as the process.
no, the land use entitlement doesn't care who owns it.
It's interesting because even if your building permit was about to expire, by statutory limitation, there's a time clock on a building permit, and you were to reapply with a new building permit, before the other one expires, your concurrency certificate would still run with it, and you could keep going. Now, however, if the building code's changed, now you got to comply with the new building code, which can be challenging. Energy codes, framing, like different, insulation, that type of stuff. So, it is possible to keep it alive. I think that the good question about the expiration, we do document that right up front on the top of the cover sheet of a reasonable use exception permit. We do document it at the end in the conditions and limitations. But as Avril said, due diligence is something that not everyone understands. We have had several instances over the years, sometimes there's a language gap, just is what it is, where somebody bought something. We had one where there was a short plat that was recently that we're dealing with where the short plat was going to expire within months. Somebody bought, and they'd never started any of the construction. Somebody bought it thinking that they were going to be able to do the short plat, and they paid basically the price of that project divided. And when they bought it, they realized they had 2 months to do all the improvements, get the permits, get the construction permits, get the engineering, make all the improvements, or it was going to expire. And there's just no way that could have ever happened. So it expired, and that they are in a very hard financial place. I don't know what we can do about that. It was very clear on the face of the final plat, or the preliminary short plat document, when it expired. So it is a challenge that we have. Records are available, whether they read them or not, it's a whole other question. Whether people, customers, citizens, community members, whatever you want to call them, whether they read them or not, that's a whole other question.
So what would they have done? In that case, the second buyer, what would they have done?
They should have gotten a lower price. I'm serious. They overpaid.
Yeah, I mean,
in addition to what she said, is go for a lower price.
Go for a lower price, knowing that the land has capacity to build more, but that the process needs to be redone. Allow for the time, right? That is not an uncommon situation. We have 3 or 4 of those a year where somebody is just in financial distress because they didn't realize that they were buying something that was basically at the end of its life cycle.
So if I got it, and I got the exception, and got this one, and all of those things done, and then I sat on it, and then I sold it to Sayed and said, now it's yours, and he doesn't see that it's expiring in 2 months from now, it's his headache to work through it.
Yeah, you're out of it.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, except that you should disclose it to him, and whether or not he reads that disclosure is up to him. And I think that's where the big challenge is sometimes when you're buying a property like that, there's a mountain of paperwork that goes along with it, and whether or not you're reading one line. So I think what Mark is saying is, how do we make it abundantly clear?
Yeah, exactly.
That this is the end of the line for this.
Right.
There's no way for him to read that out of all the reams of paper that I would have given to him.
So we do have inquiries on a regular basis for, I heard there was an approved subdivision on this property. And we look through our records, there is no application for any subdivisions on this property. So we get the whole gambit of inquiries and, potentially questionable real estate listings describing things that may or may not exist. So we work really hard to provide people the documentation. When people come in asking about a property, we send people copies of recorded plats so they can see where the critical areas are that are adjacent to them. Like it's almost like bombarding them with a lot of information, but if you're buying a property, you need to know a lot of information. So we do our best to give them that and to make clear, please be aware of whatever it is.
And we do, I know Avril calls them too. We do call real estate listing agents that have properties listed that are basically painting a picture of something that is this myth that will never be achieved. And we do call them and have very hard conversations with them that this is a fabrication, that this is not something that's achievable here. You really need to change this listing. Sometimes they change it, sometimes they don't.
Got it. So which means that I will, if I was buying such a thing, then I would have enough ample warning to do that properly and check that and confirm that we're at the end of the line before I go for it.
Every week we get multiple inquiries saying, I'm in my due diligence phase. It ends in 3 minutes. Please provide me all the information. And we do our best.
Got it.
Are all these information electronically available to the applicant?
We provide everything electronically. We reply back with PDFs with links to all the regulations, copies of recorded plats or approvals or whatever is applicable. We provide that when people ask for it.
Thank you.
Okay. So shoreline substantial development permits. These are the permit for building and rebuilding docks. They can be for other things, but in Sammamish it's mostly docks. This used to be a type 2 land use decision, which was an approval by the director that could be appealed. David has a great story of a small project called the East Lake Sammamish Trail, where the work would have been, or the proposal would have been a type 2 land use decision as a shoreline substantial development permit, but given the robust interest by the community, it was decided to change it to a type 4 so that it could be decided by the hearing examiner and then appealable to the Shorelines Hearings Board. But that's been a while. And so now we don't have that same value in that level of land use permit. And so we have a lot of just homeowners who want to rebuild their old decrepit dock and bring it up to current code, and we have to take them to the hearing examiner. It's a lot of work.
And expensive for the applicant.
It's expensive for the applicant. It's a lot of staff time for something that they have to meet all this criteria anyways. So there's not a lot of value add at this point to keep it as a type 4. So we're hoping you don't object to changing it back to a type 2.
If something happened that were out of the ordinary.
We could come back with another, do a switcheroo.
It's more, in other words, it seems perfectly reasonable as long as it's perfectly reasonable, but then all of a sudden it's not. And it's always important to me that we then have reasonable ability to adapt to those situations, like the trail. Right?
And so here's the table of our current land use types. So shoreline variances, shoreline conditional use permits, those would remain a type 4. And those are for people who want to do their private beach club, or they've got their postage stamp lot and they want to reduce their setbacks, or like something that's more intensive that would trigger those. We did try to think if, like, is there any reason why, we shouldn't change it? These are all just
So
docs.
one example of something in the future that I know of, thinking about all the things that happened out on the shoreline, roads, they're generally out of that area, the 200 feet. There is one big project that is on the horizon that is now finally reaching funding by King County, and that is the North Diversion. So if you're not familiar with the North Diversion, it is the connection to the Brightwater, a wastewater treatment facility. And it's one of those final connections. Currently, all of our gray water effluent, whatever you want to call it, goes south around the bottom of the lake through the Heathfield and Sunset pump stations and over down through the King County trunk line down to Renton. And what they would be doing is replumbing the gray water effluent to go down to the Parkway and go north through a force main into Redmond, where it would then tie into the lift station system that takes it all the way up to Brightwater, which is out by Woodinville, Maltby area. And then that facility then ultimately treats it, and then it goes out by tunnel out to the Puget Sound under Point Wells, just south of Edmonds. So that's the different arrangement that they have there. And what that does is and Sammamish Plateau Water and Sewer District has been replumbing their system over the years to accommodate that. It got delayed by the county because the actual treatment facility where the wastewater goes now had a major emergency, and they basically robbed Peter to pay Paul, and they took our North Diversion project out of the budget, and they made the emergency improvements to their wastewater treatment facility. That's when we went into a sewer moratorium, if you recall, a number of years ago. It's because Samplat was basically recognizing that they had been plumbing their whole system to drain to that direction, and all of a sudden the county pulled the plug, so to speak, on that system, and until they had a commitment to get it back, we were in a moratorium. So that's a high level history of that. But the point of this is that line will likely be built through a shoreline substantial development permit, and there might be many interested parties in the alignment of that line and in the ultimate design. Maybe not. It might be built down the Parkway. We don't know yet. But we could come back and make this change again to ensure that the community has access to a hearing locally. I think that was what was really important with the trail, was that, it was the first time I think I've been to a 3-day hearing in this room with the hearing examiner. I've been to many 2-day hearings on plats, but never been to a 3-day hearing, and that was the first 3-day hearing here. So there were a lot of really interested people in that trail permit, and it really gave people a place to come comment and to be heard. The hearing examiner rolled all that up and sent it to the state. It was still appealed to the state, and we had to deal with it again at the hearings board, but we can make that change again.
I heard from someone that trail has a history that goes back to the days when Sammamish Incorporated, and it was one of the reasons. And knowing how, I don't want to say affluent, but how that community is, I mean, how much headache does the city want to go through with that community, changing something that they insisted on having 9 years ago and changing it for them now, and they would just come back and wanted to go back to the hearing examiner so that they make sure that it goes through a lengthy process, that it's not up to an individual to make the decision.
Well, yeah, no, I agree with that, and that's why it was changed. But the trail's permitted now, so we're done with that whole process. We don't see anything really except for that massive sewer line, which might not even be in the shoreline. It might be in the upland, up in the Parkway. One thing we're looking at is how can we partner with the county to rebuild the Parkway, not bigger, but the road is failing in a lot of places. It needs to be rebuilt. So how do you do two things at one time. And if it is in the parkway, it would not require this type of permitting. If it's in the trail or down near the water, and if that's where we run into problems, but it's enough years out that we would prefer to flip this to a type 2 because of the impact that it's having on the property owners along the lakeshore. With every dock that comes in, it adds thousands of dollars to the cost and many months to the timeline of permitting because they have to go through a public hearing that nobody even attends. I think that, we do these pretty regularly, and all it is the applicant, the dock designer, the city staff, and the hearing examiner.
So I'm hearing that it's in the best interest of that community to change it back to...
I'd agree with that.
Okay.
So question here on the type 2, since it's the director's decision, could the director decide to forward a particular application to the hearing examiner for different reasons?
Not that I'm aware of in the way the code is structured. That then would apply to things like short plats too, right? We would then be put in that box. So I don't think so. However, the appeal is not a local appeal to a type 2 shoreline substantial development permit. The appeal would be to the Shorelines Hearings Board. So, in the hearings board they're not all like judges or attorneys. There are lay people that are appointed to the hearings board. It's a really interesting body. So that's where it would go. So if there was a disagreement on something like a dock, maybe setbacks or, maybe someone's obstructing navigation, we do see that, then it would, on appeal from our decision, would go to the Shorelines Hearings Board, who really is the right body set up to adjudicate that. The hearing examiner isn't really set up to deal with a navigation issue where there's a dispute between property owners over navigation.
Who makes that decision, David?
It's the Shorelines Hearings Board.
No. Who makes the decision that this should go to hearing examiner, right, and hearing board?
Well, that's exactly what we're talking about right now, is if we flip this to a type 2, by the simple nature of it being a shoreline substantial development permit, a shoreline permit that's governed under the Shoreline Management Act, then the city could make the decision, right? But if somebody doesn't like the city's decision or disagrees with it, or there's an error in the city's decision, which happens, then the path would be for them to appeal it to the State Shorelines Hearings Board, which, I have to say, having been to many of those hearings over the years, is a very accessible body. You don't have to have an attorney. You don't, it's accessible.
So the point here is that in type 4, where it would go to the hearing examiner, and if we flip it back to type 2, it still can be appealed to a secondary body. So there's a path forward, but for the majority of the cases, they'll just sail.
Right. I mean, even in the type 4 scenario, so say the director makes a recommendation to the hearing examiner approves it for the city. That's the final decision on the part of the city. And somebody is aggrieved or disagrees or thinks there was an error. They have the ability then to appeal the hearing examiner's decision, final city decision, to the State Shorelines Hearings Board. So it all goes to the same place in the end. Just that for the trail, we wanted that extra stop because we wanted the community to be able to have a place where they could be heard, and where we had that additional step locally, because we think that's really important for the community to have access to.
So the issue of the 3,000 square foot footprint has also come up recently. We've had quite a few people who either want to build new homes that exceed a 3,000 square foot footprint, and we've told them, no, this is a new home, this is what it is. But we've also had several homes that are greater than 3,000 square feet already, where they want to do modifications or additions or rebuilds or bump outs, whatever it is. And there's no allowance for those existing homes to do anything. So we are, and also we realized that there wasn't anything in the code that exempts schools. So there's a gap. So we want to exempt schools. And we were also considering and would like some feedback on whether or not we should have some small allowance one time. If you meet some criteria, if you have an existing home prior to when this rule went into effect, one time, maybe like a 300 square foot addition, and that's it. And that would grant like a little bit of relief for people who are looking to do something to make something more accessible, or to make something more livable, or just modernize it. Granted, these like really large footprints are from the early days of Sammamish, so they're not the most modern construction. So we would like to hear what you think.
Are you going to be specifying or quantifying what the small area is?
If there's going to be an exception, I want this to be as quantified as possible. I don't want to have to think about if it should. I want it to be 100% objective. If you meet the criteria of you were built prior to the regulation, you're a certain acreage, you're a certain square footage, then you can do one time 300 square feet or
So
something.
you're not going to identify that number in the code.
300.
Well, no, we can identify a
There
number.
it says it's small.
This is just the.
So we're throwing out the concept. So off the tops of our heads, we were thinking 300 felt very reasonable. If you think it should be more or less or not at all.
Here's why 300, because we also allow, in the case where somebody is non-conforming, this wouldn't apply here, because if you're creating a new non-conformity, it doesn't apply, but you're allowed 10%. So if it's 3,000, 10%, 300, that's how we landed there.
So the one I would suggest adding would be ADA accommodations.
Well, yes, that sounds good. However, the planners and I were not ADA enforcers or regulation knowers or whatever. So I don't want to have to tell an applicant that they have to document to me that this is for ADA accessibility.
We already have a process in our code called reasonable accommodation that actually allows somebody to get a letter from a medical provider that says they have a real ADA need. However, we have had some people say, for example, that they should be allowed to exceed the 3,000 square foot limit because their cousin has, I can't remember.
It was someone's nephew was in a wheelchair and they visit every once in a while and they needed
a bigger
something.
Footprint.
So if it's a reasonable accommodation, as David mentioned, you have a doctor's note, the regulations say you're supposed to remove whatever it is if you are no longer residing in that residence. We're not really set
I
up to
can
follow.
tell you the example you just used. I have that in my family.
Wow, okay.
My own family. I have a family member who's disabled, who visits every now and then, maybe once every 3 months.
Okay.
But the day they visit, it's very challenging to get that individual in the house. And if I can afford to build accommodation to allow that individual to get in, I want to do it. I don't want to be restricted.
Right. And so we don't want it to be something where it's your nephew, but it's your best friend, so therefore you don't get it. Like, I want it to be available to everybody, right? So it's either you meet the criteria. So if you meet the criteria.
All I'm trying to say, don't think when people say this, they're abusing it.
Right. Everybody's different. Some people, pure intentions, absolutely.
I personally, I'm against limiting people. My land, my money, I can do what I want. I have a 5,000 square foot house. It's my land, it's my money. I want to build a 2,000 extension. I should be allowed to build it. That's my opinion.
So you don't want me to have a job?
So what we're saying here, what we're saying here is that the code currently limits to 3,000 square foot footprint. Now you could build a 9,000 square foot house, right? The way it works, 3 stories. But what we're saying is that we're proposing to grant for those homes that were built prior to January 1, 2025, when this rule went into effect, that you should be allowed a one-time 300 square foot expansion is where we would set the number to accommodate whatever need it is that you have. Now, if that's a kitchen bump out, if that happens to be, maybe one example we saw was somebody was creating an open floor plan and they needed to they needed to, and I'm not an engineer, but they needed to somehow build they were basically creating a metal frame that came out to another area, and they were having to expand with a wall to carry the load of that, because they wanted to blow out all the walls inside there and create a big open floor plan. It was a much older house.
Yes.
So they needed to be able to expand, not that much, it was like 150 square feet, but they couldn't do it because they're capped at the 3,000 square foot footprint. So we're trying, we've had people who want to build a wine cellar and a cigar humidor, you know. It's a wide range of things that we see. The most common is a kitchen addition. The second most common is probably going to be some form of an entryway where they want to rebuild the entryway. But we do see another one might be an elevator shaft that you want to put in order to make your house elevator accessible. So, you know, we think that, you know, if you wanted to say 500 square feet, I don't think we'd be hurt by it. It just is.
We'll take whatever.
We're trying to get some guidance here, and that's really what we appreciate.
Hey, I want
about
to
this
build
body.
a gym. I have money. I want to build a gym for myself. Why do you limit me from building a gym for myself?
Well, you could build it as a detached building without a problem.
No, I want to attach it to my house. It's my house. It's my money. It's my land.
We just enforce the regulations that council adopts.
But again,
Yeah.
why? The question is, why do you limit people?
So we limit the built environment, but and like David said, this 3,000 square foot limit was in place because there had to be something that would apply to both we couldn't restrict middle housing.
But that's different. We're talking about 3,000 square feet on 8,000 square foot land. I'm talking about someone who lives in 5 acres.
But the middle housing regulations, we can't differentiate between them.
This is just middle housing, what we're talking about here?
No, so this allowance would because we don't have any middle housing of this size that already exists within the city, so it wouldn't meet the criteria for this exception. So only existing single-family homes would meet potential criteria.
But I think the premise behind it, and you know, regardless of where we stand on regulating people, the premise behind it is that we needed to include a limit on the size of the building that applied to single family, because we had to also limit, because we wanted to limit the size of middle housing buildings. And the way HB 1110 reads is you cannot be more restrictive to middle housing than you are to single family. So if you were comfortable with unrestricted building sizes, more or less, I mean, minus the other controls, FAR, setbacks, those kind of things, then we could remove this. But what we heard from the community during the process was there was concern, and what we heard from the council, and we did hear from you all as well, that there was concern about the size, the sheer size of some of these middle housing buildings that you could see pop up in the neighborhoods. Now, if you wanted to exclude them in the R1 and exclude this in the R1, that's an option. But then you'd be excluding it from middle housing in the R1. And you could start to see, you know, I'm just saying 10, 12, 15, 20,000 square foot buildings being built.
So I do think
unlikely, but just
the one thing out of this conversation that I don't quite track is this is mostly talking about an addition to an existing, and I'm not sure that I understand how we have to have a restriction on additions that's got to match the middle housing. In other words, we're not adding giant additions onto middle housing because middle housing is really from that point forward going to be smaller to begin with. We're not going to have giant middle housing because we already have I'm just trying to connect in my mind how a restriction on an addition to an existing single-family home is then not fair to middle housing.
Because one of the scenarios that we heard a lot about is someone taking an existing single-family home and converting it to middle housing and doing an addition on it. So it's actually one of the things that's contemplated in our code is that when you convert a single-family home to a middle housing type, you're given some benefits. It's actually incentivized in our code to turn an existing large single-family home into a middle housing unit. So the challenge there is that it applies in that instance if you're doing an addition, right? So you would, I mean, otherwise you could take an existing home and say you're doing an addition to it, and turn it into, and again, not likely, but a 12,000 square foot building. And, that's a loophole. So what we did was we set the 3,000 square foot footprint that applies to all buildings. And what that does is it makes many buildings non-conforming. It does. And what we're saying is that in those instances where a building is non-conforming, we will allow a one-time exception to make it more non-conforming when it meets a certain purpose or not. It could be 300 square feet, could be 500 square feet, but that would also have to then be applicable to somebody who's converting. So say you had a 5,000 square foot house, and say you wanted to turn it into a triplex, and say you wanted to, do an addition to do that, you would be able to do that for that purpose as well, but you still would be capped at 500 square feet of addition, or 300, or whatever it is.
But how is that a bad thing? If I have a 5,000 square foot home and I add another 3,000, I convert it to a triplex, how is that a bad thing to the community or to the middle housing rule?
I mean, it depends who you are, I guess. I think the big challenge is the volume. That is what we understand to be the big thing, is that, we hear a lot about, and we heard for years and years, feedback about, Highcroft and other developments going in, and about, oh my goodness, these huge buildings. And it wasn't so much that there were, subdivisions happening or new homes being built. It was the volume and the huge buildings. So when we look at these rules, we're really trying to be very careful to not allow for huge buildings being built in the city. I mean, we went through so many rounds of code changes, development regs phase 1, development regs phase 2, where we added bigger setbacks, where we added FAR, where we added, ways we measure buildings. All of that is entirely focused on volume of building. So here we are now with middle housing, and we're on the edge of the cliff again, and we're looking at that cliff, and we're saying, okay, we're at a situation where you can now see huge buildings again, and we don't want to go down that path, because we've heard over and over from the community that they reject the notion of huge buildings in the city.
Is there a way we can revisit this one and allow more time for staff to think about how can they allow, let's say Mr. Eastman now, he owns 80 acres. He wants to build a 12,000 square foot house. He can do it. He owns 80 acres. Why would we tell him you can only build 3,000?
I mean, it would be a 3,000 square foot footprint, 9,000 square foot house. But yes,
No, he wants to build it flat, one level.
No, so
he owns 80 acres.
I've had almost that exact same conversation with a different couple, where it was just under 2 acre lot, and they wanted to build a single story 9,000 square foot house. And I told them, I'm sorry, our regulations don't allow it. And they were not happy. And they asked why. And we, explained the middle housing rules, and this is what was adopted by council. And I don't have a relief valve for this. There's nothing in the code that I can use. So as someone who is here to find compliance with the code that's been adopted by council, I'm seeing a strong desire by homeowners to have some amount of relief. So if you all feel that having some amount of relief is reasonable, and give whatever square footage you want to recommend, if you think it's reasonable, we are open.
We live in a city, in a metropolitan area that has the Bill Gates of the world, and it has the me's of the world, and anywhere in between. The Bill Gates of the world, they earned it. They deserve to enjoy their money the way they want. Why would we put regulations on them that pushes them away from us? We want them here. We want their property tax.
That's a whole other issue that council would need to...
But it is related, right?
It is, but... So because I'm not the policy person, I'm not the comp plan person.
But you are the code person who wants to restrict people from adding additions to existing homes.
I don't want...
I somehow feel that we are taking a very big, often used like a spade, and trying to dig something over here for this reason. I'm still struggling to put this into... this one where this doesn't come across as a restriction, this doesn't come across, because like Shyam has been saying, it's my home. I want to increase my space from 2,000 to 3,500, right? And I have been waiting to do this. I've gotten a chance to do this. I'm right now capable of doing this thing. And then I'm suddenly told, oh, you know what? You can't because we're trying to solve a middle housing problem. And it blows my mind because I'm like, what middle housing? I'm just trying to increase.
I'm not here to argue with you. I'm here to tell you that what I have learned over the years in the city, in working here, it'll be 10 years in November, is that there has historically been a rejection of the notion that we should be seeing large buildings in the city. And I've heard that over and over and over again, to the point where every council I've had that has told me what to do has had some concern over it, whether it was, the first council that I was on that I served, they wanted us to address the setbacks. Then we got into the FAR. Then we got into dynamic setbacks. Every council has chiseled away at the size of buildings, and with middle housing, and I cannot stress this enough because we cannot be more restrictive for middle housing than we are for single family. So if you're saying eliminate the 3,000, don't have a footprint limit, I'm just saying, and that's what you want to do, fine with me, but then when somebody gets upset about the size of the buildings being built in the city and come back to you again, don't look at me.
No,
because I'm the one saying, I've heard this, people don't want this big buildings.
So can I just step in here for a second? I do want to point out to commissioners that we're talking two different things here. One is a policy decision about the 3,000 limitation, which has nothing to do with this discussion. That's something that was implemented in the past, and if we want to change that, we need to go back to the council and have a separate discussion. All Avril is talking about is a problem that she's running into enforcing the code that exists and handed to her, and whether she can adjust it to provide some relief to people. So I just want to make sure it's clear that, yes, this is a valid discussion and has lots of history behind it. And if we want to address that subject, this is not the place for it in this code right here. That is a discussion with the council and in a broader picture. So let's just be careful to keep those two things. We can have the discussion, but it's not Avril's responsibility to change 3,000 square feet. That's the city council.
So let's go back to again, back to my question of small. What would happen if I wanted to use that language and come up with the ADU, add ADU to my unit, or mother-in-law? Would that be subject to the small area?
So any building, regardless of how many units are in it, are limited to the 3,000 square foot.
I know,
footprint.
but I'm applying that at 10%.
So
I want to take advantage of that 10% and use that 10% to build a mother-in-law or ADU.
As long as whatever you're doing meets our other regulations, it wouldn't matter if it's an ADU. It wouldn't matter if
you can actually use that for.
You could.
If you had a 5,000 square foot building footprint today, if you had a 5,000 square foot building footprint today, that was your house, and you wanted to reconfigure part of it and build an addition to create an accessory dwelling unit, mother-in-law unit that's attached, you could use that for it.
Are there restrictions as far as size of the ADUs that the city allows?
1,000 square feet.
Oh, wow. I thought it's less than that.
By the way, in that case, you could build a detached one and then you can do whatever you want.
You could build two of them.
Yes.
Up to 24 feet tall.
Exactly.
Is there a reason why we are adding Is there a reason why we are adding schools into this thing?
We want to exempt schools because schools shouldn't be limited to a 3,000 square foot footprint.
So they'll completely get out of the 3,000 square foot limit.
Right.
Got it.
Do you have any
How
objections?
about civic places? Don't you want to exempt them as well? Churches,
sure.
Don't you want to?
So schools is what came to mind when we were thinking about this. If you think
The YMCA, if they want to go and expand, don't you want to exempt them? I mean, I'm just.
So if you would like to see red lines, that would be for other public or quasi-public uses. Absolutely.
Now, keep in mind that this applies in the residential zones.
I just was going to ask, it doesn't apply to the commercial.
We are mostly residential, and that's where
It doesn't apply to commercial, right?
That's a good point.
So I like the idea of mirroring what you're already doing for non-conforming, the 10%. So that would be 10%, 300 square feet. The other consideration, and I'm waffling on this, is using just the 10%. If you had a 5,000 square foot, then you could do 500 square feet. Something like that would be maybe middle ground, but it would stick with the
Thought
non-conforming.
the same thing, but you got to be careful that you don't have a 3,500 square foot, and now I guess you could add 350 square feet. At the lower end, it starts to get a little,
Yeah.
maybe that's okay. I don't.
So, yeah, if you had 2,800 square feet and we applied at 10%, you could only go two. Maybe,
Well, it wouldn't apply because
except
you're
in-
still,
that's
you're
what
not under, you're still under the limit.
You bump over the minute you try to.
yeah.
Right. So if you build, if you had your 2,800 square foot footprint, you do a 200 square foot addition. But so one of the criteria we were thinking of was, homes, and we can check permit records and all that stuff to see what was the square footage of a house at time of whatever date, if there's a date in here to do the one time, so we know someone's not coming back with multiple photocopied coupons. And so we could track that. So if you think that there should be allowance, and David and I tried to think through how could someone who has 2,800 square feet, is it reasonable to allow them to have a small exceedance? In which case, should the number just be different? It snowballs, the thought process snowballs really fast. If you want us to try to draft something up to that effect, so I don't have to think of anything on the fly, we could bring something back in a couple of weeks that has some language to that effect.
Some creative thinking.
We will do our best.
Thank you.
Okay.
The one other short comment here would be, I was trying to think about, it's easy to have this conversation around putting a kitchen bump out or adding a bedroom or something, but there may be lots of other things, like I don't know what else this would apply to, and do we need to think about the use at all?
I really hope we don't have to think about the use.
Do we care?
I don't know. I'm
Why
just
should
trying
we?
to envision.
I would rather please not.
Yeah, why should
if someone wants a 300 square foot walk-in humidor, if they want to have a 300 square foot ADA accessible bathroom, I don't care. I don't want to have to think about it.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that goes along with Hisham's position.
Again,
Don't
it goes back
dictate.
to exempt schools, right? Sorry.
I understand. I just think we should think about that a little bit because, I'm trying to think of examples. A covered deck is a different use that we don't think of when we talk about this. Does it matter? Or is there some other things that we're not thinking of that people would want to do that we should somehow treat differently? And maybe not, but I just want to be careful
So
not to
the covered
get
decks-
trapped into it's just this one thing, which
Right.
is adding on a kitchen extension or adding on a dining room extension or adding on a bedroom, because it could be other things that were, or
Right.
maybe not. Right.
So right now, the covered decks are part of the footprint. And so for people who have come in saying, I just want to do a covered deck, I'm like, you already have a 3,800 square foot footprint. We cannot issue you a permit for this. And they're like, it's a deck. I'm like, I am so sorry. This is the rule I have to enforce. So that's part of the reason why I don't care about, or I don't want to have to care about what it is. So if someone wants their covered deck, if they want to have their humidor, they want to have an indoor sauna, I just want something objective, and I don't want to have to think about what the use is, because it just makes it easier.
Because that use might also change next week.
Yeah.
They'll build it and then they'll put something else in there. Maybe. So we'll work on this. We'll also talk about that a little more.
Yeah.
And I also wanted to offer that, if anybody wants to talk more offline about the collegial conversation about the 3,000 square foot limit, maybe there's other ways to achieve what we're trying to achieve as a city. And we're completely open to that. There is opportunity on the horizon to make some changes. I don't know that it's the best way to achieve it. I do know that what we're trying to achieve is to restrict really large buildings, which I've heard over and over from the community that they don't want. But maybe there's a better way to do that. So happy to, if you want to reach out to me, happy to talk about it.
Also, it would be good to contact the other cities, see what they have as far as an limit.
Do you know offhand if other cities have a footprint limit?
There's a wide range of tools. I don't want to belabor this,
Okay.
but the big challenge is that when we went to middle housing, we went to unit lot divisions and we went to different forms of ownership, it became really hard to use FAR as an effective tool. We used to have that in our toolkit, but when you have multiple buildings on one property, how does FAR work? So that tool was taken out. So we started looking at other tools, and this is one that we came up with that seemed to get to the point where you could have a 9,000 square foot building. But maybe you just say you can't have bigger than a 9,000 square foot building, and maybe that solves it. I mean, do we really have homes that many that are bigger than 9,000 square feet? I mean, if somebody wanted to build it, I don't care. Like, I'm not trying to judge them. I'm just trying to find a way to make this successful. And what we were really trying to achieve is buildings, 9,000 square foot cube is pretty big, but that it's not so big that it's, dominating the neighborhood. That was really, it comes from a place of love for the neighborhoods, but maybe we're getting it wrong in some instances, and some of the conversations we had with people would tell us that, so.
Yeah, and 25 years ago, this was a huge issue in Bellevue. I can't remember exactly what they did, but, people were buying up multiple lots, taking the houses down, and it's just.
They added that FAR.
Yeah.
I mean, I do remember when the economy crashed in 2008 that in Bellevue that we were tasked with putting together an ordinance to allow the conversion of large homes that are vacant into duplexes.
Yeah, so things change.
It was an interesting time.
Avril, how many more of these do we have?
One more.
Okay, could somebody extend the meeting maybe 15 minutes?
I propose extending the meeting by 15 minutes.
Second.
It's been moved and seconded to approve to extend to 8:45. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, no. Thank you.
Okay, so this is sort of a streamlining change that we want to make. Right now, if we have a short plat or a plat, and the preliminary plat or short plat has been approved, and it's now in the site development stage, and all the infrastructure and site work is being done, the building permit applications for the homes cannot be submitted until all of the infrastructure work is completed and the final plat has been recorded. And so what this does is it sort of extends the amount of time that the site is under construction. So there cannot be any review of the building permit plans that can be ready to go for issuance as soon as that final plat is recorded. So if you go to the next slide. So this is the line item for submittal requirements. We want to remove this. People can submit. We won't issue a building permit until that final is recorded. But to allow a little bit of parallel review and processing, which will help shorten the overall amount of time that the site is bare, dirt, all that stuff. So we would love your support on striking this.
Makes sense?
Right, so we wouldn't issue. It's just the submittal, allow construction documents to be reviewed. And then as soon as something's finalized, we can issue the permits and then they can start on the vertical construction.
That was my question. As long
Okay.
as you're not going to issue it because
Yeah, we couldn't.
you're not
issue it.
taking any risk of.
Right, well, because it's not final, the building permit would have to be issued under however the lot exists without being subdivided.
We are obligated under state law to issue one permit. If you have one lot, you get one permit. So if you do an assemblage, say you take 4 lots and you're turning them into 20, you can get 4 building permits because you do have 4 existing lots, and we are obligated under state law to allow you to build 4 units. Typically, builders build model homes that way. So they get, a couple models out there, and as long as those are on the existing lots, and as long as they are designed to be forward compatible with the final subdivision, that's usually the challenge, is making sure that they're built to be compatible with what is finally there.
Is that it?
That's it. We appreciate all of your patience through these discussions.
No, lively conversation.
So,
Yeah, we would have had a bigger conversation until Mark gave us the
crack the whip at us. So in 2 weeks, I'll come back with some drafted up red lines. David and I will do some creative problem solving to come up with some language to address the feedback that we got. And so I think tentatively for December 4th, we would then come back based on your feedback with some final red lines so that we can have a public hearing and you can do a formal recommendation to City Council.
There are two things on the agenda for the 16th. There is the 25-26 docket, which there are two items. The first is a proposal, much like the one we talked about, much like the one that enabled this, that allows us to come back if the town center plan is updated and the code is updated in 26, it would allow us in 27 to come back and make any adjustments we need to make, right? We want to have that opportunity. The other docket item is the rezoning or comp plan change and rezoning of the Building 120 CWU property. Those are the only two docket items. That item plus this are the two items that are on the agenda for the 16th.
Okay,
Thank you.
thanks, Avril. Good job. All right. Anything else, David?
No, except for a thank you for the conversation and for the patience while we work through the town center stuff and come back on the 20th of November with that transportation presentation and North Star conversation and basically roadmap for how we move forward.
I will comment that we've had some discussion about this, but I'd encourage commissioners to start thinking about what your questions will be for the transportation folks, because I think the way that it's going to be productive with them is if we provide good questions in advance that they can answer. I think the live fire situation is what's been tried in the past and has not always been successful. So it'll be really important for us to spend a little time, I already started my list, thinking about and writing down the questions we want them to then come prepared to answer. That will help this go a lot better with them. So I just encourage that you think about that.
So to add to that, we will be reaching out and asking you for your top 3 questions, because across, a commission of 7 members, 21 questions, could be quite complex. Understanding that we do have a fairly lengthy matrix of comments and questions received from the public and the commission so far that we already are working on. So there is quite a bit here to cover. So what we really want to know is what's most important to you to hear about. So, while we'd love to see, 7 to 10 questions, 3 would really be a place. And now we're not talking about 3 multi-part questions. We're talking about 3 questions.
My list is up to 9 and I'm trying to consolidate them into fewer. That's what I'm trying to do.
Well, David, you have the list of my questions, and I'm assuming that they have it. And I would like to have their answer before that meeting. So it's for me, it's probably the best way, right? And waiting and then at the meeting.
I will convey that to them, and I will also, suggest that if you have a chance to reach out to Audrey directly,
Absolutely.
she's the one who's responsible for that body of work.
I believe she was CC to that email
And I know that they have been working on it, and our hope is to have a list of questions or statements or things in a matrix that we can then include with the agenda bill for the evening, so it'll be pushed out in advance.
So let's say beyond what is that, November 20th, is that what you say?
Yes.
That is a meeting that we're going to have with the consultant and the staff. But is there any plan to go back and revisit the town center FSIC?
So,
Is there any process to go back and change that because of the discussion, because of clarification, because of corrections and all that?
Well, that all depends as if there is something new that comes out of it, right? As if it really is a matter of how the information is packaged and presented. That doesn't change the outcome of it. But if there is new information that is brought to the surface, or if there is something that's a clerical exercise that needs to be fixed or changed, there is a process called the addendum process, something that Sound Transit uses regularly in EISs.
I'm familiar with it.
And we could file an addendum to the FSEIS. That usually is the process you go by to.
So at this point, the plan doesn't go back to the council for final adoption?
Oh, absolutely, the plan does, because we have not adopted a plan yet.
When is that?
What are you?
So
For the council.
I think, let me just step in here for a second in the interest of time. I think that there are several council members very interested in this conversation. And so if there is something substantive that comes out of it, I think we will very likely see them ask to revisit, or change whatever. And they
So
are
there
the
is a
ones
possibility
that
will
need to
come.
drive that, right? We're just asking the questions and having the conversation. And then they're, like I say, assuming they're still here by the point we get to that point, but, because there's an election coming up. But they will definitely drive that if there's interest at that level. And so we just need to our part is to ask the probing questions so that gives them the information to then act on it if they choose to.
Right, but I was not asking David that if he knows that it's going to come back to us. I was asking about the procedure as far as the council. Is it going to go back to the council for final adoption after November 20th discussion with the planning commission?
Sorry to ask this, is what going to go back to the council for final adoption?
The town center plan?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, that's what we're working on. Yeah. I mean, we have a lot of work to do on the plan. The only plan that's been adopted for town center is the 2008 town center plan. There has not been anything else adopted since then.
So what is the status of final SEIS?
Environmental impact statement. Right.
But that has been issued.
All it is, it's issued. It's not something that's adopted by the council. It is
Exactly my
an
point.
administrative tool.
When is going to be adopted by the council?
It does not get adopted by the council.
It doesn't. It doesn't have to go through the council.
Nope. All it is a decision-making tool for decision makers to make sure they're aware of potential significant adverse environmental impacts.
But I think it's fair to say that if there was something that needed or they had interest in doing, there would be some money involved, and so they would probably have to approve any actions that involve some additional funding.
Possibly, yeah, or there could be, a recognition that something should be studied a different way or looked at a different way that might result in an addendum to that document. It's an administrative issued tool for decision makers to understand what impacts might come from something. Now, understand that not all impacts are picked up in an EIS, right? There are impacts that are not known to be significant adverse environmental impacts. And I said this to the council previously, but the legislature was very specific in the words they chose, that with an EIS, in order for you have to identify that there is a significant adverse environmental impact, right? And those words have meaning. So it's not just that there's a potential small impact here, it's a probable significant adverse environmental impact.
Okay, thank you.
I think before we adjourn, John had something he wanted to make a comment on.
Right, thank you. Over several of our meetings, there's been discussion about e-bikes and e-motorcycles. At last night's Parks Commission meeting, the Sammamish Police gave a presentation on their perspective of those devices. Might be worth watching. I believe the police gave the same presentation to City Council maybe the night before. So I had saw it. So if you have questions about e-bikes or e-motorcycles, the latter seems to be the big problem. Go look at one of those meetings. Thanks.
Cool, thanks, John. Anything else from anybody? If not, could someone move to adjourn?
Seconded.
It's been moved and seconded. We adjourn for the evening. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, no. Thanks, everyone. See you in a couple weeks.